All right, let's dive in. Today's deep dive is taking us straight into a classic UFO case that you've been eager to explore. The 1967 Cusack encounter in France. And, wow, you've really gone all out with the source material. We've got investigative reports from both UFO enthusiasts and skeptics, official documents, encyclopedia entries, even some academic analysis thrown in. It's like a UFO research buffet. So let's dig in and see if we can separate the facts from, well, the fiction, or at least the speculation.
You know what really grabs me about Cusack is that it's not your simple I saw a light in the sky kind of case. We're dealing with multiple layers of interpretation here, shifting narratives, and a whole lot of mystery.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Set the scene for us. What exactly went down in Cusack?
Imagine this. A sunny morning in rural France. Two children, Francois and Anne-Marie, are tending cows in a field, playing cards to pass the time. And suddenly, they spot this bright spherical object just hovering nearby. Then, not too far from this strange sphere, they see four small black figures moving around like they're inspecting the ground.
Okay, that's already giving me chills. Sounds like something straight out of a science fiction film.
hmm
So, did these beings look like your typical big-eyed gray aliens?
That's where it gets even more interesting. Their initial descriptions were actually far from the classic alien image. They described them as little devils, short, dark figures that sounded more like something demonic than extraterrestrial.
Little devils. Whoa, that definitely adds a layer of creepiness to this whole thing. Do you think this initial devil description could indicate that folklore or local beliefs played a role in how they saw the event?
It's definitely a possibility. Our brains tend to try to make sense of things we don't understand by drawing on familiar patterns, familiar stories. So when you're hit with something completely outside your experience, it's natural to try and fit it into those existing frameworks, even if they might not be entirely accurate.
That makes sense. So we have these little devils hanging around this mysterious glowing sphere. What happened next? Did they, attempt any abductions or anything?
Well, no alien autopsies were reported. But what the children described next is almost more bizarre. They said that these figures dove headfirst into the top of the sphere, just vanishing, as if it was made of water. No doors, no hatches, just straight through. And then the sphere just took off, leaving behind this strange sulfurous smell.
Hold on. They just phased through the metal. I'm officially lost. And that sulfurous smell, does that support the whole devil imagery?
The smell is interesting because it could be interpreted in a few different ways. Some researchers have suggested it could be a misidentified scent of ozone, which, can be produced by electrical equipment. But it's also worth pointing out that sulfurous smells are often associated with demonic imagery in folklore and mythology.
So it could be that their minds just added that detail to match their initial perception.
Exactly. It might have just fit the narrative they were already building in their heads.
Okay, fascinating. So we've got shifting accounts and possible folklore influences at play. But before we go full X-Files on this, shouldn't we consider some more down-to-earth explanations? I mean, isn't there a chance this whole thing could be chalked up to mistaken identity?
Absolutely. And that's where the skeptics step in. Their main argument is that what those children saw wasn't a spaceship at all, but actually a misidentified helicopter. Specifically, a Bell 47, which was common in the area at the time.
A helicopter, really?
Sure.
But wouldn't they have heard it coming? Those things are pretty loud.
That's where the psychology of it all gets really interesting. Remember, the kids were engrossed in their card game, and there was also a tractor running nearby, creating a noisy backdrop. And our brains are always filtering information, focusing on what seems most important in the moment. So it's entirely possible that their attention was so fixed on the game that they didn't consciously register the sound of the helicopter approaching, especially if it was coming from a direction they weren't directly looking at.
So their brains might have just tuned out the helicopter noise. That's pretty wild. But what about the visuals? How does a helicopter suddenly become a glowing sphere?
Well, you've got to picture it. Bell 47 helicopters have this really distinctive rounded canopy, sometimes called a fishbowl design. Now imagine seeing that from a distance, maybe with the sun glinting off the curved surface. It's not that hard to see how it could appear as a bright spherical object.
Okay, I can kind of see that. And what about those little devils? Could they have been the helicopter pilots or passengers, maybe?
Exactly. The black description could have come from misinterpreting pilots in their flight suits, or even passengers in dark clothes. And remember, there was a lake nearby. There could have been divers in wetsuits, which would further explain the dark, short figures.
All right, the pieces are starting to fit. But here's what I don't get. If this was just a normal helicopter flight, why all the secrecy surrounding it? We have these gendarmerie records, the French police, that supposedly looked into this incident. What did they find?
Well, that's where things take another turn. Despite promises of official confirmation or denial, those gendarmerie records never actually turned up. We're left with a frustrating dead end, this lack of official clarity that just fuels the mystery even more.
A dead end. So was there a cover-up? Or did someone just misplace the paperwork? This is getting more and more intriguing by the minute.
It's definitely a puzzle. If it was just a helicopter, why not just confirm it and be done with it? And if it wasn't, why the lack of cooperation? This lack of transparency is something we see time and time again in UFO cases, and it really makes you wonder what they're not telling us.
Okay, before we go too far down that rabbit hole, let's zoom in on some of those intriguing details that don't quite line up with the helicopter explanation, like that sulfurous smell. Could it be something other than ozone or just a figment of their imagination?
It's possible. While ozone is a plausible explanation, there are other natural phenomena that can produce a sulfurous odor. Volcanic activity, for example, or certain types of geothermal vents. Now, there's no evidence of those in the Cusack area, but it's a good reminder that our knowledge of the natural world is always growing.
Good point. We don't want to limit ourselves to explanations we already know.
Mhm.
What about that levitation? Surely a helicopter can't explain people just floating upwards into a solid object, right?
Well, it's important to think about how perception can be influenced by context and what we already know. Have you ever seen someone climb quickly into a helicopter head first? It's a fast, kind of awkward motion, especially in older models like the Bell 47.
I can't say I have.
So, for children who've never seen a helicopter up close, especially from a lower vantage point, this awkward scramble could easily be perceived as floating upward.
Ah, I see. It's all about perspective. And remember, they were partly hidden by that hedge, which could have distorted their view even more. Speaking of the hedge, didn't that also play a role in the dwarf descriptions?
Exactly. The children were on lower ground than the object, and that hedge was partially blocking their view. This could have created a visual illusion called foreshortening.
Foreshortening? What's that?
Think about looking up at a tall building. From the ground, it looks like it narrows as it goes up, even though we know it's actually the same width all the way up. That's foreshortening, a trick of perspective. In this case, the kid's lower vantage point, along with that hedge, could have made normal-sized adults appear shorter, like dwarfs.
Okay, that makes sense.
Uh,
It's amazing how easily our brains can play tricks on us, especially when we're dealing with something totally unfamiliar.
and it's not just our brains. Even the most open-minded investigators who talked to the adults years later admitted that the whole incident could have been rooted in folklore, amplified by how the children interacted and shaped by years of retelling the story. But even they couldn't entirely write it off.
So we're still in kind of murky waters here. Plenty of evidence points towards a helicopter as a possible explanation, but those lingering details and unanswered questions keep those other possibilities open. This is quite the puzzle. What do you find most compelling about all this? It's amazing how this one case brings together so many different threads, eyewitness accounts, the psychology of perception, even a hint of Cold War intrigue with those missing gendarmerie files. It's like putting together a puzzle, but some of the pieces are different shapes than we'd expect.
That's a great way to put it, and it really highlights a key challenge we face in UFO research. We tend to go into these cases with preconceived ideas about what a real UFO event should look like, but the reality is much messier and more complex than that. These encounters often just don't fit neatly into any category.
So how do we navigate all that messiness? We've got this pretty plausible helicopter explanation, but then we also have these intriguing details that don't quite fit. How do we weigh it all up without jumping to conclusions?
That's where critical thinking really comes into play. We've got to approach the evidence with a healthy dose of skepticism, and not just about the possibility of extraterrestrial visitors. We have to be skeptical of our own biases, our own assumptions. It's about asking the right questions, considering different perspectives, and being open to the fact that there are things we just don't know.
So what are some of those key questions we should be asking in this case? Where do we even begin to unravel this whole thing?
For one, we need to look more closely at how reliable the witnesses are. We've already talked about how memory can be influenced, especially in children, and how folklore can shape our perceptions. But we also need to consider their overall credibility, their reputation in the community, and any potential reasons, conscious or unconscious, for them to fabricate a story.
Right, it's not about accusing anyone of lying, but more about understanding the human element in all this. And I guess that's where those interviews done years later with the adults become really valuable. They give us a sense of who these people became, how their experience in Cusack impacted them, and whether their story holds up over time.
Exactly. It's about seeing the whole picture, not just focusing on the incident itself, but also understanding the context surrounding it. How did the community react? Was there any social pressure to conform to a certain narrative? These are all things that can influence how a story is told and retold.
Okay, so we're looking at the witnesses, the social context, checking for any inconsistencies or red flags. What else should we be scrutinizing?
Well, the physical evidence, or in this case, the lack of it, that sulfur smell, while it could potentially be explained by ozone or folklore, it's still a curious detail. Are there other reports of similar smells associated with UFO sightings? Could there be a natural phenomenon that produces a sulfurous odor that we just haven't thought of yet?
That's a great point. We don't want to limit ourselves only to explanations we already understand. What about that scorched grass that some reports mention? Was that ever investigated?
The gendarmerie noted it, but the available records don't provide any in-depth analysis. And this is where the lack of transparency is really frustrating. Was the grass actually scorched? Or was it something more ordinary, like a chemical spill or even animal droppings? Without proper scientific investigation, we're just left guessing.
It's like we're missing pieces of the puzzle, and those missing pieces make it that much harder to see the whole picture. It's almost like they want us to jump to conclusions, whether it's aliens or hoaxes.
It's definitely tempting to do that, to fill in the blanks with our own assumptions. But it's important to remember, just because we don't have evidence for something doesn't mean it didn't happen. There might be perfectly reasonable explanations for the missing information that have nothing to do with a cover-up. Maybe those records were lost or destroyed, or maybe they contain sensitive info that's still classified.
Okay, I'm trying to keep an open mind. It's just tough when there's so many questions still hanging out there. So we're looking at the witnesses, the physical evidence, the official response, or lack of response, I should say. What else should we be factoring in as we try to make sense of all this?
Well, the sociocultural context is crucial. 1967 was a really interesting time, you know? The Cold War was in full swing, and anxieties about nuclear war and espionage were high. Space exploration was capturing everyone's imagination, and science fiction was exploring all sorts of possibilities, including, of course, alien encounters.
Right. It was like the whole world was on edge, wondering what was out there, both in terms of threats and incredible new discoveries. It makes sense that people might be more likely to interpret unusual events through that lens.
Exactly. We can't separate an event from the environment in which it happened. The cultural mood, the hopes and fears of a particular time period, all of that shapes how we see and understand the world around us.
It's amazing how this case has taken us from a farm in France to these bigger currents of history and culture. It really shows how connected everything is. We're being detectives, historians, and sociologists all at once.
That's so true. And that's what makes doing these deep dives so rewarding. We're not just passively taking in information, we're actively wrestling with it, grappling with those uncertainties, and exploring the human stories behind these events.
It's like we're not just investigating a UFO sighting, we're investigating ourselves, our own ways of understanding the world.
That's a brilliant insight. Because ultimately, whether we believe in aliens or not, cases like Cusack challenge us to really think about how we form our own beliefs. Why are some people immediately drawn to the alien explanation while others are quick to dismiss it? What are the underlying assumptions, cultural influences, personal experiences that shape our viewpoints?
This is blowing my mind. It's like we've unlocked a whole new level of understanding here. Instead of getting stuck on the did it happen or not debate, we're asking these deeper questions about the nature of evidence, perception, and even belief itself.
And those deeper questions often lead to more profound insights than any definitive answer ever could. They force us to confront our biases, to challenge what we think we know, and to be more critical of the information we encounter, especially when it involves these extraordinary claims.
Okay, I am officially on board with this approach, but before we get too philosophical, let's bring it back to the Cusack case. We've talked about all these factors to consider: the witnesses, the physical evidence, the sociocultural context, even our own psychology. But how do we actually apply all of this to this particular case? How do we take all this information and come to a conclusion, or at least a well-informed opinion?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And there's no simple answer. But what if, instead of trying to prove or disprove the extraterrestrial hypothesis, we shifted our focus to understanding how beliefs are formed?
You're going meta on me again. I love it. So you're saying instead of getting hung up on did it happen, we should focus more on why do we believe what we believe?
Exactly. In the Cusack case, we can see how all these different factors contributed to the creation and evolution of the story. Childhood perception, the influence of folklore, the media's desire for sensationalism, even those Cold War anxieties we talked about.
It's like the perfect storm of perception, interpretation, and cultural context. Makes you wonder how many other UFO cases might be influenced by similar things.
It's a fascinating area of study, and it really emphasizes how important critical thinking skills are, not just for analyzing UFO sightings, but for navigating this complex world of information we live in.
All right, this has been an incredibly thought-provoking conversation so far. We've only just scratched the surface, but I'm already seeing this whole case differently. We've really gone deep on this one, explored all the angles, the evidence, the theories, the psychological stuff, the historical context. It's a lot to wrap our heads around. I'm curious, after all that, where do you land? Do you lean towards a specific explanation? What's your gut feeling on the Cusack encounter?
It's tempting, to want to give a definite answer, try to tie a neat bow around it all. But honestly, Cusack, it remains an enigma. And that's all right. Sometimes the best thing we can learn is that there are limits to what we know.
So you're saying we might never really know for sure what those kids saw. We're stuck with speculation and unanswered questions.
We might. There's always a chance new evidence could pop up. Maybe someone with a key piece of information comes forward. But even if we never get that smoking gun proof, the journey itself has been valuable. Digging into the evidence, questioning our assumptions, that process has been worthwhile.
Totally agree. I feel like I've learned so much, not just about Cusack itself, but about how we approach these mysteries in general. It's been a trip through the history of UFO investigations, the psychology of belief, even some self-reflection on how we form our own opinions.
That's the power of a deep dive like this. It's not passive consumption, it's active engagement. We wrestle with uncertainty, and that uncertainty can lead to new insights and questions we hadn't considered before.
So where does that leave us with Cusack? Do we just file it away as a likely misidentified helicopter? A case of kids' imaginations running wild in the midst of Cold War tension? Or is there still room for something truly unexplained?
Well, that's up to you to decide, ultimately. Based on everything we've looked at, the helicopter explanation holds up pretty well. But those little details that stick out, the smell of sulfur, that weird description of the beings merging with the object, those things do keep other possibilities alive.
And that's the core of it, isn't it? It's not about getting a definitive answer. It's about embracing the mystery, the unknown,
Yeah.
being comfortable with those unanswered questions and recognizing that what we understand about the universe is constantly evolving.
Exactly. And here's something else to chew on. Even if we accept the helicopter as the most likely explanation, that lack of confirmation raises some red flags. The secrecy, the lack of transparency from the authorities, what does that tell us about how these kinds of events are handled, even when there might be perfectly ordinary explanations?
Right. It's almost like that lack of a clear answer becomes a piece of evidence itself. Evidence of something being hidden, whether intentionally or not, and that just feeds more speculation and conspiracy theories.
It really highlights the need for more open, transparent investigations into these phenomena, a willingness to genuinely engage with the topic without resorting to ridicule or dismissal. Recognizing that, sure, most UFO sightings might have conventional explanations, but there could be a small percentage that truly challenge our understanding of the world.
And that's what makes it all so fascinating. It pushes us to think critically, question what we think we know, and stay open to the possibility that there might be more to reality than we currently grasp.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
So next time you come across a UFO story, think about Cusack. Don't shy away from asking questions, digging deeper, considering different viewpoints. Embrace the mystery, the unknown. Who knows what incredible discoveries might be waiting for us just beyond what we currently understand.
What a fantastic way to wrap things up. This deep dive has been a wild ride. It's a good reminder that curiosity is powerful, and sometimes the greatest discoveries come not from finding answers, but from learning to ask better questions. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, keep those minds open and keep exploring.